The first of the Noble Truths is the truth of suffering. In the second teaching, His Holiness the Dalai Lama begins to expand upon this truth as the foundation for the other three. What is suffering, and in particular, what is meant by the Sanskrit term dukkha in Buddhism? It's often said falsely about Buddhism that it sees all life as suffering. From the fact that Buddha said, all this is suffering, people infer that Buddhism is radically life-denying. In fact, Buddha never said all life is suffering. He only said the unenlightened life is suffering. He went on to say, more importantly, that the enlightened life is bliss. It is nirvana, free of suffering. He himself experienced a boundless energy, a perfect bliss. Buddha never said he still suffered. So Buddhism is very optimistic about our prospects. It urges us, of course, to confront the suffering attendant upon our ignorance. It encourages us that we can find true happiness once we develop wisdom. Buddhism helps us to notice that pleasurable experiences are temporary. Pleasurable occurrences exist only in relation to the background of our experience. If we look at that background, we find that we are born in pain, die in pain, and in between are subject to illness, hunger, and the effects of the elements, not to mention our increasing decrepitude as we grow older. The background of our life's experience is indeed a basic form of suffering. It's called the suffering of change. The Dalai Lama points out that suffering prevails no matter which realm of existence we are dwelling in, be it the desire realm of the senses, the form realm of intellectual pursuits, or the formless realm of advanced meditational states. As long as we appropriate experience from the self-centered perspective, driven by misunderstanding our true nature, we are doomed to frustration. Because of our fundamental self-centered ignorance at the root of our consciousness, we react to the conditions of our existence with a kind of selfish desire that produces all kinds of other afflictive emotions. These afflictive emotions can be compared to the 7 deadly sins. But it is the fundamental ignorance at the heart of our existence, our misperception of the absoluteness of ourself, that gives rise to these afflictive emotions and prevents us from realizing the lasting joy and happiness that we all seek. So, at the basis of suffering, self-seeking ignorance is the first link in a causal chain that the Buddha called the chain of dependent origination. Once we have a good grasp of the nature of suffering, we clearly see the start of the chain, which is the second truth, the origin of suffering.
All right. That don't get the that devashisage, Dambasa, and Kualanda, Dumda, and Cavalry, Kuala Medayore. And that is Shamiluse. Not ship's house and Maritan Gimdula.
Now, talking about the Four Noble Truths, the first one is, of course, the truth of suffering, and here the sort of the usage of this term truth in context of the four four factors. It seems that according to different philosophical schools, there is a different interpretation of this word truth, but I'm not going to touch that, partly because I myself do not remember all of this, and partly because it is going to complicate my explanation. So in dealing with complex issues like that, perhaps the best sort of response is to adopt a dignified silence.
Tagada only the talking about. Again, Tanda, Savage, the Naga Chitty, then she made us to Muslim to Tone, so usage. Then she Muslim to Tom Maton Tone, so the Pagay in Japanati, 10 years than the Yamari, to know what it is.
One of the reasons why I pointed out this complexity in the understanding of this term truth in relation to the Four Noble Truths is because there is a fundamental difference between, say, Madhyamaka Prasangika school and mainstream Buddhist schools as to how one distinguishes between ordinary beings and Arya beings, the superior beings. The mainstream Buddhist schools makes the distinction on the basis of whether or not the individual practitioner has gained direct intuitive insight into the Four Noble Truths, a criteria which the Madhyamaka Prasangikas do not accept, because according to Madhyamaka Prasangika school, even non-Arya beings, ordinary beings, can have direct intuitive realizations of the Four Noble Truths.
Jenida, Dunedambas Shayundu, the conditions was Lavina, Rangu, any Lanyu Gunjun Le Jiting. That was Indigelia, Takadazawa, she got to make it dancing in Chilia. Any Dunedambas, that's all things. That Delia, she nerd, not Jew.
So, what exactly is the meaning of dukkha or suffering? Here, suffering or dukkha is that which is the basis of our experience of painful experiences. And in brief, dukkha refers to our state of existence as conditioned by karma and delusions, or karma and afflictive emotions. So in Asanga states in Abhidhamma Sammucca that dukkha can be, the concept of dukkha, the concept of true dukkha or the truth of suffering must embrace both the environment where we live and also the individual beings living within it. So when we talk about the environment in which the individual, unenlightened individual beings live in, then here Buddhism talks about its cosmogony of the three realms of existence, the kama dhatu, and desire realm, formless realm, and form realms. The difficulty here is how to try to sort of conceptually understand. The point here is how to conceptualize this Buddhist concept of the three realms of existence. How can we conceive, for example, like form realms and formless realms? Of course, we cannot say that Buddha has talked about this in the scriptures. That alone is not a sufficient reason for a Buddhist to accept the existence of these realms. Perhaps sort of the most sort of comprehensible way of looking at the Buddhist concept of the three realms is one fundamental Buddhist sort of approach, that is to understand states of existence in terms of levels of consciousness or levels of mind. For example, like within, according to Buddhism, the very distinction between enlightened existence and unenlightened existence has to be understood on the basis of the level of mind or level of consciousness. The individual who is within a state of existence where the consciousness or the mind is unenlightened, or consciousness, the mind is undisciplined and untamed, that is a state of samsara. And someone who is within the state of being which has consciousness that is disciplined, tamed, and enlightened. That is a nirvanic state of being. Similarly, in Buddhism, we also find the distinction that is made between ordinary beings and arya beings or superior beings, again on the basis of the level of consciousness or level of realization. An individual who has gained direct intuitive realization of emptiness or the ultimate nature of reality is said to be arya being or superior being, and someone who hasn't gained that realization is said to be ordinary being. So similarly, we can look at this division into three realms of existence, desire realm, form realm, and formless realm, in terms of the levels of consciousness in their causes. The subtler the level of consciousness that the individual attains, the subtler the realms of existence that the individual can attain.
자상가 치다 소소 이니 가솔부에 데베 처리야 되는 데베 연대는 템베 즉 소화되와 롱지아요 다 소화되와 조된데 소화되와 되는 즉 현자로 조여된 지기 데발이야 레서비요다 딘제부회 된데기다 가솔이
So we can look at the concept of the three realms from that point of view, sort of relating that concept to the idea of levels of consciousness or levels of being within one's mind. For example, in our ordinary states of being, if the individual's the mode of being is very much sort of within the context of attachment, sort of developing attachment towards perceptible objects, like say desirable forms or pleasant sensations and so on. So these, and having attachment towards these more kind of physical levels of experiences. And these sort of gross levels of interaction and thought processes and sensory experiences sort of lead to a form of existence which is sort of confined within the desire realm in the future as well. Similarly, there could be an individual who may have, in some sense, transcended the sort of attachment towards sort of immediately perceptible objects of perception, such as desirable forms or sounds or whatever, but rather is attached more towards more inner dimensions of sort of joy, like sort of not so much physical sensations, but is more attached towards internal kind of joys or states of joy or bliss, and that type of sort of individuals lead. Sort of create causes that would lead them to future rebirths where the very physical existence is in a much more refined form. Similarly, there could be individuals who have, again, not only transcendent attachment towards more physical sensations, but also towards pleasurable, any form of pleasurable or pleasurable sort of sensations or joy, but rather is aiming more towards a state of equilibrium or equanimity, and that kind of way of sort of course, that level of consciousness is much subtler compared to the others, but still there is a form of attachment towards a particular mode of being. So that states of mind can lead to what is known as the fourth level of, the grosser levels of that can lead to the fourth level of form realm, and then the subtler attachment towards these states of equanimity or equilibrium leads to the formless realms. So there is a way of looking at the three realms, sort of relating to them to levels of consciousness.
직전 청지 차리디 다 동감다 일단 되베 네 나서다 가서 민직된로 민직된다 엔드네만 돌을 루난게 그래 대신집시 숨주서 숨 다 그러고 탑제베 삼대 말만 말해 쟤는 어떤 삼대 당군 입어서 뭐 따라해 삼대 10회 이전에 위하면 쟤 삼대 민직 삼대 당부 면체 춘직 삼대 입어 면체 룽직 삼대 숨어 면체 10회 요하면 나도 그건 전에 샹도스리 또 다가 이미 메신 나야지 전에한테 리로서 전에 다다다 되고 말해 지금 인데 차지 이거 다다나 봐 꼭 간다지 네 주사네 꼭 견다비 우와 나 지금 가서 주고 빨리 인데 차로 차샤나 인데 태면으로 차샤나 딱고 뭔가 중니 셰셰베 차들을 다다베 겨인데 지기 거기서 무슨게다 그 차셰 통은 거 있잖아요 그뒤 차네 이 중진의 셰셰고 다다면 됩니다 세브샤가
So based on this cosmogony of sort of the three realms of existence, Buddhism talks about the process of universe, sort of infinite process of universe coming into being and sort of going through a process of extinction and dissolution and disappearance and then again coming into being. So that process has to be understood in relation to the three realms of existence. And according to Abhidharma literature, which talks about metaphysics and cosmology in the Buddhist discourses, it is from the third levels of form realm downwards, that is subject to this continuous process of coming into being and destruction and dissolution. And whereas from the fourth state of form realm onwards, which also includes the formless realm, they are outside this process of coming into being and this, sort of this evolution of the physical universe, one could say. So, and this this kind of infinity of the process of evolution that the physical universe goes through is very related to the question which came up earlier about the question of Big Bang and its relation to Buddhist cosmology. One thing I can say is that if the understanding of the scientific or cosmological theory of Big Bang entails an acceptance of only one Big Bang as the beginning, then of course that would not go well with the basic Buddhist cosmology. Then if that is the case, then Buddhists would have to kind of bite their nails and sort of come up with some way of understanding how it would not contradict the Buddhist idea of the evolutionary process of universe. However, if the concept of Big Bang does not entail there being only one Big Bang, the beginning, rather if one can accept multiplicity of sort of Big Bangs, then of course that would go very well with the basic Buddhist understanding of evolutionary process.
아다 민지 춘지 룽지 디디 삼대 당원이 그 수고사디 아다 páli 아비다만 무슨거나 그리 찍고 있나?
Sorry, I forgot to translate earlier. His Holiness was talking about how much of this discussion is based on the Abhidharma literature, and this very idea of sort of evolutionary, evolution of the physical universe, going through an infinity of the process of dissolution and evolution, that is in the Abhidharma literature. But having said that, whatever is in Abhidharma literature need not necessarily be accepted as literal, because we know that the cosmology in Abhidharma, particularly the sort of the cosmology of our universe, according to the Abhidharma, is based on the model of this idea of a Mount Meru in the middle with the four continents around it. And also we find that many of the descriptions of the size of the sun and moon, which we find in Abhidharma literature, is directly against, contrary or contradictory to the scientific discussions, explanations of these facts. So in which case one would have to conclude, given that scientific experiments have proven these claims to be wrong, that we will have to accept the conclusion of the science on these points.
전에 다 파 지금 전문이 차단다 디디 가다지 용어 시团다 나가집에 있는 용어 때문에 아니 봐 청지시대지 디야 규라면 나로네 송여래 전에 가다 디디 체리 시야다고 잘해서
So what we find is that in Buddhism there is an understanding of a sort of a conception of a cosmology where the evolution of physical universe is understood in terms of the processes of the four elements, the fire, water, wind, and earth. And if one can sort of add on space as an element, then there is 5 elements. And there is a complex discussion of that, not only in the Abhidhamma, but also in the Uttara Tantra, the sublime continuum as well. And these descriptions or explanations seem to be very similar to the scientific sort of theories of cosmology, explanations. So this is how Buddhism understands the evolution of the physical universe, or one could say the environment. Then when talking about the beings, the sentient beings that inhabit these environments, then of course there is an acceptance of multiplicity of sentient beings within the Buddhist world.
타기하는 시번은 직다 숙미다 숙제니 다 숙제를 숙차라 근데 아주 전문인 다가강 차샤네 다 아주 통수 아주 통퇴하게 시류 되제가 풍부도 시류 서로 다 가다지 락베 숙 예등에 그렇지 락베 숙 매등에 스피릿인데 근데 그 મં구지다 예대입니다.
So within the realm of the sentient beings, of course there is an acceptance of sentient beings with corporeal forms and sentient beings who could be perceived as formless. And within, even within the sort of our sort of familiar world, in Buddhism, there is an acceptance of diversity of sentient beings, many of which are perceptible to our sensory faculties, and then some which are not so obvious to our sensory faculties, for example, like the spirit world.
Jenny, certainly, deities, and spirit, So,
generally speaking, in Buddhism, according to Buddhist understanding, that human form is considered to be one of the most ideal forms of existence because of its suitability or because of its conduciveness for practicing Dharma. So compared to the human form of existence, the spirit form would be in fact considered inferior because of its less effectiveness in pursuing the practice of Dharma. Of course, as sort of members of this sort of beings in the spirit world, they may have certain faculties or powers that are not open to us, like sort of certain powers of precognition or maybe some kind of supernatural powers. But the fact remains that there are parts of this world, where human beings also live.
대탐자로 뇽배 샹완제
And so all of these sentient beings are under the control of delusions, under the control of afflictive emotions and thoughts. And they are, in some sense, one could say, products of delusions and afflictive thoughts and emotions. Lama Tsongkhapa sort of quite gives a vivid description of the state of being in samsara. So I suppose the unenlightened existence of sentient beings in samsara. He gives the analogy of someone being sort of tied together very tightly by the ropes of karma, negative karma, and delusions, and emotional, afflictive emotions and thoughts, and then put within this and sort of being sort of encased in this net of very tightly bound sort of net of sort of ego consciousness and sort of self-grasping attitudes, and then being sort of thrown around sort of aimlessly by the torrents, sort of, by the currents of fluctuating experiences of suffering and pain. And that is the characteristic of an unenlightened existence. So the question is, if that is the case, what is dukkha? What is the suffering? So Buddhism talks about 3 levels of suffering. One is the suffering of suffering, or one could say obvious sufferings. And the second one is sufferings of change. And the third one is a suffering of conditioning. So when we talk about suffering at the level of the first type, which is the suffering of suffering, we are talking in very conventional terms of experiences that we can all identify as sufferings. These are painful experiences. So when we talk about suffering of suffering, here we are principally talking about, in Buddhism, 4 main experiences of suffering, which are all considered to be fundamentally in the state of being in suffering. These are the suffering of birth, suffering of sickness, and aging, and death. And the significance of the recognition of these states as suffering, or these experiences as suffering, as a kind of an impetus or catalyst towards a spiritual quest, is very strongly demonstrated in Buddha's own personal life story. Buddha, as a Prince Siddhartha, according to the story, is supposed to have seen suffering of a sick person, and an old person, and a dead sort of person being carried away, and these sort of sights is supposed to have led him to the realization that so long as he cannot free himself from this infinite process of rebirth, infinite process of birth, he will always be subject to the other sufferings. So this has led, and then seeing a spiritual aspirant is supposed to have led the Buddha to the full recognition or awareness that there is a possibility of a freedom from this cycle of suffering. In Buddhism, there is an understanding that so long as you are subject to the process of rebirth, that all the other sufferings are in some sense kind of natural consequences of that initial starting point. So one could say that one's life is characterized within the sort of the cycle of birth and death, sort of sandwiched in between are various sufferings of illness and aging.
다들 교회 동네에서 돼야지. 나중에 교회다 용라 디기르디다. 가장 아주 사실 다음부터 야만다. 가장 사실 다음부터 인신이 교회 동네에서.
So the second level of suffering, the suffering of change, refers to experiences which ordinarily we would identify as pleasurable experiences, because in reality, so long as we are in an unenlightened state, all our joyful states or joyful experiences are contaminated, and therefore they are ultimately suffering.
대야니 동네 사제가 동네 몽구치니 거라 동네 다마 거름네 아니 대왕만 받고 싶마도 아니 양다거나 대화지 말이스 걔도 양다거나 대화지 뭐이나 동네기 줄어 지점 때문에 대처기 동네 집에 들어왔는지 대화만 받지 강나 때는 영향이 주터라 지점 때문에 대처기 대화 집에 들어와 뒤죽음도 가서.
The reason why Buddhism says that these supposedly pleasurable experiences are ultimately states of suffering is because, according to Buddhism, there is an understanding that we perceive them as states of pleasure, sort of experiences of pleasurable or joyful, only because in comparison to a sort of a painful experience, they tend to appear as almost like a sort of a relief. So, they are in some sense relative. Their pleasurable experience sort of status is only relative to a painful experience. Therefore, if there are truly sort of joyful states, joyful experiences, then just as the more we indulge in the sort of causes that lead to pain, the painful experiences increase. Similarly, the more we engage in the causes that give rise to these supposedly pleasurable experiences, then the pleasure or the joy should intensify, which is not the case.
In our daily life, for example, when we have some good food, some good clothes, right? Clothes. And some kind of
ornaments.
Ornament here and here, sometimes here also. So you see, this as a short time to certain period. Oh, you really feel, oh, this is something really marvelous. Oh, very good, very good, very good. And oneself also is deeply satisfied, and also show to other. But then one day pass, 1 week pass, 1 month pass, then the same object to that, same object. But then you may get frustration. So that's the nature, that's the fact. And also fame. At the beginning you may feel, oh, happy, oh, now I have good name. Then again, as the time goes, then sometimes you feel frustration. Dissatisfaction. And friend. Also, I think they including the sexual. See, at the beginning, you almost become mad. Then I think the very the same factor eventually create hatred, fight, and worst case, killing, murder. So that's the nature. So every beautiful thing, every good thing, I mean, everything which we consider something
desirable.
Desirable. If you look, you see, closely, and time goes, or most of these facts eventually give us suffering. So that's the second
level.
Then the third, now the fundamental thing. Why is it why is it that kind of nature? And the answer is because all these, happen due to ignorance. So the I think the very name ignorance is not comfortable, not good. So under the influence or under the control by the ignorance, there is no possibility to some kind of permanent state, right? Permanent state of happiness. So some kind of trouble, some kind of problem always happen. Like
so long as we remain under the power of this ignorance or fundamental misapprehension or confusion, then the sufferings come about almost like sort of one after another, like ripples on water.
Shazangata dujik dunge sungdeadi dujik dunge de kashi sungi yasata dujik dunge ta zozo ta kada khoyat kasolita da chawa dujik dunge sungdea ta di yana da zo da men ro zo le de nyumong be xiawang du du be da che ta da ini dunge tension mong ban dunge denge 다들 신기 동해 침이 다 주칭에기 라든 용무 깨와리야 냉엘이 제수 제니 라든 용무 깨야리 거기에 가서 튼비기는 없이지 드니실이야다 겨울주도 있을거야
So the third level of suffering or dukkha is in what is known as the sort of suffering of conditioning. And this refers to the mere fact of our unenlightened existence, which is under the influence of, under the control or influence of this fundamental state of confusion, and also the negative karmas that this confusion give rise to. And the reason why it is called the conditioning, the suffering of conditioning, is because not only is this mere state of existence serve as the basis for our many painful experiences in this life, but also it serves as a basis to create causes and conditions for future sufferings as well.
So that delay that namjin sungya that did shiv kya jamrisha time da samda time da time da the conditions lona 균지 집어도 면체 균지 집어도 땅도 라베미다 와 임말이 참에다 was도 계지 지도야 이시에요.
So in order to counteract this the third level of dukkha, one of the most powerful antidotes is the one that is explained in Dhammakirti's Pramanavartika, which is to meditate on Sorry, I'll start again. In order to develop a deeper understanding of this third level of suffering that Buddhism talks about, this suffering of mere conditioned existence, one of the sort of useful way of looking at this is the one that is described in Dhammakirti's Pramanavartika, where he and also in Aryadeva's 400 verses on the middle way, where there is an emphasis on reflecting upon the subtle, transitory, or impermanent nature of reality.
균자 지루요. 근데디 고라 신중 규직 왕기 그 지루도와. 다 계지 지야서야 돼. 루구 규신지 텐 그 계지
So when we talk about impermanence or transient nature of things, here it is important to bear in mind that there are again two levels of meaning here. One can understand impermanence in terms of how something comes into being and then stays for a while, then disappears. And that level of impermanence or transitoriness is something that could be quite easily understood. And also, that kind of destruction requires, one could say, a secondary condition. Something comes into being and then stays for a while. And when its I suppose, lifespan, one could say, comes to an end, and another condition acts as a kind of a catalyst to destroy its continuity. But there is, however, a subtler understanding of the concept of impermanence or transient nature of things. This is the mere sort of effect of how everything goes through a dynamic process of change, that how everything is sort of momentarily changing, going through a process of momentary changes. So this momentary changes, that the process of momentariness that all things go through is not because there is a further sort of secondary condition that makes things become momentary, but rather it is the very cause that led to the thing to come into being that is also the cause of its destruction. One could say that within the cause of its origin there is also a cause of its cessation or destruction.
태양 깨지 당보 깨지 입에 두수 마대바디 예 타임이라고 시기하라 이제 조조디 깨지 당보 령균이네 집에 주는 좋습니다.
So so this transient nature this momentary transient nature can not only be understood in terms of an entity, the first instance not staying, not enduring during its second instance or second moment, but also the fact that when the first instance comes into being, it is not static, it is moving towards its own cessation.
세상과 딘데기 다그 깨고 코네 지게랑신도 두다가 인도자네 깨지기 지게야디 친중 두시야나 때문에 랑이 깨지기 두 코네 쳐셔지.
So since everything comes into being right at the beginning, the very birth of things comes together with its seed or potential for its dissolution or destruction. So one could say that the destruction or cessation of things and events does not need a secondary further condition.
So
therefore, in Buddhism, all things or phenomena are said to be sort of other-powered. They are under the power of their causes. They are under the control of their causes.
디 지르한 도스첸 뒤 샤완지 임베 최예는 동행임베 켰었어 말해대 다 안다대 지라도마 다 풍부감만 상다는 거야. 다 풍부감만 상다는데 풍부디 루야디 계시기 디 샤완지레스 당 안한서 안다 녀활르메 풍부디 계시기 가르서는 말해 버렸어. 자 근데 인정 안한서 풍부 머리베 샤완도 예르시레스 머리베 샤완도 예바주잖아 머리베 샤완도 예바 티시도 라와메바 동네에는 신바 다디 치시 머리고 마세버도 다 가다 동네들이 타더네들 차도 다 감숨도 시부숨기 네 상당히 체지직 상당히 지금 그게 동네 문주고 치주로 예미 특히 해봐 여봐서 마도 싸와 다 쓰고서 가와 여친절이야 지시 머리고 상황도 여친절이야 아니 과와
So once you have developed that sort of that kind of understanding of the transient nature of reality or phenomena, then you can situate your understanding of dukkha within that context, and then sort of reflect upon our existence, our aggregates of mind and body, our very existence as an individual in this samsaric world. We know that given that it is, it has come into being. It has come into being as a result of its own causes and conditions. Therefore, it must be also other-powered. It must be also under the control of the causal processes that gave rise to its coming into being. So in the case of, however, in the context of our own existence within the samsaric world, the causes that we are referring to here are nothing other than our fundamental confusion or marikpa or ignorance and the delusory states that the confusion give rise to. So we know that so long as we are under the domination or under the control of this fundamental confusion and the delusions and the afflictive emotions that the delusion give rise to, then there is no room for a lasting joy or lasting happiness. Of course, within the three realms of existence, we can talk about comparatively sort of more joyful states of existence. We can talk about relatively joyful existence. But however, so long as we remain within this samsaric world, wherever we are, whether in the form realm, formless realm, or desire realm, so long as we remain under the power or domination of these twin forces, the fundamental confusion and the delusions that this confusion give rise to, there is no scope for lasting joy. And so ultimately, or in final analysis, we are in a state of suffering or dukkha. So that is the meaning of this third sort of understanding, third level of understanding of dukkha.
머리과 세네 민변은 머리과 뭐셔주잖아요. 맨날 사요래. 아다리 가서다 담이 뒤줄에 차라 먹지 예배 개발을래 머리부터 샤이르잖아요. 맨날 개발요래. 근데 지용기 머리과 세네 세고야고 나서 대원두기로 등에 두고 말아. 레디니 그 간다지 등에 민두신도 등에 영야지 가진 치고래. 몽배왕 셔도 세우잖아.
So although this fundamental ignorance, or I've been using the word confusion, the Sanskrit word is avidya, which literally means ignorance. Although according to different sort of interpretations of the fundamental Buddhist doctrine of anatma, or no self, there are different interpretations of what is meant by this avidya, or ignorance. However, the general meaning that is common to all of these schools is an understanding that there is an ignorance, a fundamental ignorance at the root of our existence. The reason is quite simple, because we all know that from our own experience, what we deeply aspire is to gain happiness, and what we try to avoid is to avoid suffering. However, our actions and our behavior leads to more suffering, and it does not lead to the lasting joy and happiness that we seek. So this must surely mean that we are operating within an ignorant sort of a way of thinking. So that is the fundamental confusion that is at the root of our existence.
다 미카샤리야 녀동에 튼주동에 이다동에 된대양 삼나 셈리야 규체 엘해동에 다시 늘라 다가는 지금 감공을 해동에 된대 그 삼다는 야지 셈리야 시작 편도에 되고 된대양도 가버리 야 리카샤리야 나라티에 야 리르 찍디 하나님이 미르데사디 아주 뭔들 디나네 미르데디 상고실 찍어래 상고실 찍대세 류다가 다 제가 너시 동네다 머리에 상황도 주고 상담도 용도 해나 다 작실지야 돼 급도 들리면 되겠네 다 현다도 따지면서 정도 왔습니다.
So when reflecting on the nature of dukkha, according to the Buddhist teachings, for some practitioners, of course, reflecting upon the sufferings in the specific realms, such as the realms of sort of hell-like realms or animal realm or preta realm, for some people, these reflections may, in fact, be very powerful to kind of motivate towards a deeper spiritual quest to attain freedom from suffering. However, for many other people, which includes myself, reflection upon our own human suffering perhaps is more effective. The fact that, although according to Buddhism, human form of existence is considered to be one of the most positive ones, where we have all the potentials to perfect enlightenment and so on, even then, the state of existence of a human life isn't that joyful. We are subject to sort of unavoidable sufferings of birth, death, aging, and sickness. And also when you reflect upon the fact that our conditioned existence is under the influence or domination of this fundamental confusion, and also the delusory states of emotions and thoughts that the confusion gave rise to. Once you realize these facts, then for someone like myself, the recognition of the suffering or dukkha nature seems to be much more effective than thinking about sufferings of some other realms.
다 머리에 땡기 아니 두시로 소배다 땡들 하면 되지 마 두야 손을 주잖아요. 아니 땡지는 더 커도리야 단단데 디주 디케 강 머리에 아니 강 머리에 땡기 두시 세 어다 송샤들이야 토미기 군둥 나라려 아니 겐숨샤르사리 나가도스.
So in the Buddhist scriptures, when this causal process of how this fundamental confusion give rise to volitional acts, which then give rise to a birth in a samsaric world, within the sort of model of these 12 links in the chain of interdependent origination. Buddha, in one of the scriptures, stated that made three observations. One is that he said that because there is this, that ensued. Because this came into being, that came into being. And because there was fundamental ignorance, volitional acts came into being. So when commenting on that, on these three statements, Asanga in his Abhidhamma Sammucca has talked about three conditions, and I think understanding of that point would be quite useful here.
다 계속 가르쳤나? 아니 디에벤 딘중 소야되기 아니 요함에 비견사 담레스 요함에 비견사 가르쳤나? 아니 간다치 아주 진지 제대하디 그직 시지 여네 그래 시지 여네 이거 진지 제인 거야 마다 직디니 지 로이요 나 지금 지대 제법 로이요 원도도 타네 싶으시 말이스 그래 진지 예버되게 아니 괜찮듯이 요야샤리스.
So when commenting on the first statement, Asanga said that the statement of the Buddha that because there is this, because there is this, that came into that also exists. Asanga stated that the significance of that statement is to tell us that all phenomena come into being because they have causes. It's not as if there's a kind of one could say infinitive or causal chain. It's not as if there was a first sort of a beginning, and then things came into being. So therefore, Asanga referred to that observation or qualification as the first conditioning.
Then, that yeba jigi, yeba samshigi, geweya, never gave chow chitumodu tasumre, never yamare. So the name in the sane, gave rang do give chow chevala, ranija, doing shane, gave it. The name do digive, digit. That was yeba some chowa, Korani, do shane, gave any rangshi change, didn't do change get to yours. That Delia, any Tommy Midabikins. You have something to your maris. Korani, Gazi Jigdong, Midaba rangshi change any one, any kinji to yours.
When commenting upon the second statement, that because this came into being, that the other comes into being as well, Asanga spoke about what he called the impermanent condition, the condition of being impermanent or quality of being impermanent. The significance is that just because something exists is not enough to produce an effect. In order for something to produce, to have the potential to produce an effect, that very entity or thing itself must be subject to causation. It must also come into being as a result of other causes. So there is this infinitive causes. So just because something exists, mere existence alone is not adequate for giving rise to consequences. So not only should the cause be existent, but also the cause should be impermanent. It should be subject to causation.
That Kang Maribi change Dushi Sasuyati, Ta Midabe Dujengi, any Debu Kaya, Ta Kasore, Kitu Resum, Deu Maris, Duran, Debu Kanda Kaina, Teda, Riktumbi Duchi Tani, Kihurmado, Daji, Rigmitungi Dule Gigmaris, Dream in any Ko Duji Lady, any 간다지 동해 타임이 있는데 동해 뇌신도 동해 타야가 내지 쌓아야지 그때인데 머리가 연구를 했지.
So the third statement that because there is this fundamental confusion, volitional acts followed. Asanga, when commenting on that statement, talked about the further qualification that is needed for for a cause to produce an effect, and he referred to this condition as a condition of potentiality, and that is the idea that it is not enough or adequate for the cause to be existent, nor also to be impermanent, to produce a particular or specific result. It is not the case that everything can produce everything or anything. And there must be some kind of a concordance between causes and effects. There must be some kind of relationship, natural relationship. Therefore, because our state of existence is that of a suffering, although what we desire is happiness, but out of ignorance we create suffering. So therefore, the fundamental root of our existence is suffering. So there is a concordance between the state of the result and its cause. So all in all, there are three conditions: that the cause should be existent, it should be impermanent, it should be concordant with the effect or with the result.
Tene gyuda kenliya, any yan namrang nangsiga yawa mabuji, mindawa mabuji, shibsago ya shayo mare. Da, berkhada, benan yenling gyusaro, tenji shijing gyusaro, da sungdeng gyu. And Ganyam Jusan Richard Sechuda, the Henry decided to clean the Moshe, Channel of the Regata, Dule Mandata, Social, the other, kneeling it to see.
So when in Buddhist analysis, when trying to understand the causal relationship between say ignorance and the volitional acts. What is required here is a sort of a complex understanding of the causal nexus. And here, of course, in Buddhist scriptures, there are a lot of discussions of different types of causes and conditions. However, the principal sort of understanding of cause must be in terms of two types of causes. One is known as the material cause or the substantial cause, and then one is the cooperative conditions, the factors that assist in the causation. By material cause or substantial cause, we are talking about the very stuff that turns into the effect. So, you can talk about a physical continuum of a physical entity. It's the very stuff or the material that turns into the effect is the material cause. But you need many other factors that would allow that transition or that process to take place. So these are the cooperative causes or contributory causes, one could say. And similarly, when we talk about conditions, there are different ways in which conditions can affect a result. In the scriptures, there are, for example, of course, although these complexity in the ways in which conditions can affect a result may have more to do with complexities of the operation of mind or functions of mind. However, we find in the scriptures there is a discussion of 5 types of conditions, such as the objective condition, which refers to the perceptive object. And then you have sensory faculties, like the organs that give rise to the perception. Then you have the immediately preceding condition, which is the earlier continuum of your consciousness, and so on. So you see there is a kind of complex understanding of the process of causation in Buddhism.
Jenny, when a yelling to Sluzane, Pena may yelling to Slavina. Bajik Zadi, Korachi, Trade Payagi, Zayunji, Trade Payagi, Nubit, Zayunji, any, the main yelling Shermado. And Mekon Baba of Jig yelling, Guamnoa. So Takora, Bajik Zadi Gane, Bayagi, because Zayunji, Nubit, Zayunji. That dination, Shebe, Ten, Sheba, Sheba Kirungi, Ten Galia, Zayunji sometime over some. They are the Pamer Kujanama Young, so she was how great I got a I should do. Checkada Tashi, the Shiva Tara, then a Chevy, then a Gong Shiva do Kosoke, Gong one de Modubudu, which you have never. The Nitikia in Nubajik, Zaji Shiva Tara Dene, Kushabaji. And Taki won't be Dene, Yakurji, sometimes matter.
So, for example, in the case of, say, let's take the example of fire. What would be the material cause or the substantial cause of the fire? One could say, that there is a potential existing within the fuel that is used to burn, make a fire, which then becomes the fire. So similarly, in the case of consciousness, perhaps the issue becomes more complex. For example, like say our sensory perceptions, sensory consciousnesses. Although what is needed, we need, it is obvious that we need the physical sensory organs in order for sensory perceptions to take place.
No. Nervous system.
Of course, this would also include the nervous system as the basis, the physical basis for the occurrence. So although in the traditional sort of classical Buddhist scriptures there is hardly any discussion of the nervous system, the systems of sort of the nervous system, perhaps this is something that needs to be added onto the Buddhist epistemological texts or Buddhist texts on psychology. And however, the substantial cause of the consciousness would not be these physical entities. The substantial cause of the consciousness has to be understood in terms of its own continuum, be it in the form of a potential or a propensity or whatever, but it has to be understood in terms of its continuum. So one could, although it is a very difficult sort of a topic, but perhaps one could say that one can understand. So one could understand in terms of the continuum of the subtle consciousness, because we should not sort of lead ourselves into a position where we end up implying that the material cause or the substantial cause of the entity or whatever it may be should be exactly the same, because we cannot maintain the position that the sensory perceptions, the substantial causes of sensory perceptions need not always be sensory perceptions, because sensory consciousnesses are gross levels of consciousness, and they are contingent to the physical organs of the individual being, whereas their continuum should be should be understood more at the level of subtle consciousness. So perhaps one could say that at a certain point they are in the form of potential rather than actual conscious states. So when we talk about consciousness or shepa, which is the Tibetan word, we should not have the notion that we are talking about one unitary sort of monolithic entity, something that is out there, or some kind of one entity. We must appreciate the complexity of the mental world. So within the realm of mental phenomena, it seems that feelings or sensations and thoughts are two sort of factors of mind which seem to be perhaps most predominant in our in our consciousness. So now let us try to sort of examine how do the feelings and how do the discursive thoughts occur within ourselves, within us. So when talking about feelings, of course, we are talking about two dimensions of an existence, where one can speak about feelings purely at the physical level of sensations, but the more complex sort of issue is the trying to conceive or trying to understand feelings or tsorwa in terms of mental consciousness, the mental consciousness. And although, of course, one has to accept that there must be some connections with the nervous system of the body, but we must also be able to account for deeper levels of our feelings as well, sort of feeling, or one could say tones of experience. So here, of course, I'm pointing towards the sort of the nature of mental consciousness, the sixth mental consciousness. Here, I would like to point out that, of course, although the researches which are being undertaken now is quite few, but also at a very sort of elementary stage. However, there are experiments done on meditators. Although the experimental kind of sort of experimentations are very rudimentary or very elementary and at a very sort of early stage, however, these experiments are pointing towards a phenomenon which is perhaps difficult to account for within the current scientific paradigm. However, what they point out is that without any sort of physical change within the body, without any sort of movement, physical movement by the individual, simply by using the force of the mind through a single pointed state. These experiments have shown that one can affect the physiological states of the person, and these physiological changes that are taking place remain quite difficult to explain within the current sort of assumptions about the physiology of human being. Now, to me, what this point to is that although when we talk about human consciousness, when we talk about our consciousness, we are talking about a contingent phenomena. Of course, human consciousness is contingent upon the human body. All our experiences are contingent upon the human body. So this human mind and human body are in some sense inextricable. Yet at the same time, what this seems to point out is the possibility or the possibility that human mind, the mind, although it's contingent on the body, however, has a sort of a power of its own, which by simply through reflection or meditation or training of the mind can be enhanced.
Will Singapore, Luigi, Chictati, nervous Chictarian, Jor Chinche, and will give a Shebakorangan will say, Chictum to sometimes, the Ritan will say, give a dean pa, Luke Zalia, Paj, could you tell you ever can you see all that? Musunda, Corpore, Chixani, Butai, shit. That will get on the That's not the other community. Yanajik that you just found that the Negatan in could will game Yorba. So that the Shevachicks nearly Shevatigini, Lulpa, Luke Duter, Zed, the Park, you the savage.
And also, we know that now within the modern medical discipline, there's a growing recognition of the power of will in the process of healing, and how a will can affect the healing process. So there is a sort of one could say, effect by will on the physiology of the person. So that is a fact that is recognized even in the modern medical discipline. And also we know that, as to how will is developed, it could be a case where the person does a lot of thinking, and thinking about all sorts of reasons, all sorts of grounds, and so on and so forth. One can develop a strong will. Similarly, someone could develop such a will through meditation or whatever. So there seems to be an acknowledgement that will can affect physical change. But as to the question whether sort of a pure thought, as it were, can, what seems to be accepted is that whenever thought occurs, the thoughts can give rise to chemical changes, movements within the brain, which then is affected or expressed or manifested in a physiological changes and so on. But as to the question whether pure thought can lead to such physical effects, or whether it is the case that whenever a thought occurs, it occurs as a result of chemical changes within the body or brain, that seems to be an open question. And I've asked on several occasions to scientists and medical scientists as to whether it is possible for just to have a pure thought first, and then that thought processes can give rise to chemical changes, which then is affected at the physiological level. Most of the time, the answer seems to be that there is an assumption that because consciousness is dependent on consciousness is contingent upon a physical base, be it brain, that every occurrence of thought must necessarily be accompanied or be caused by chemical changes within the brain. But to me, that seemed to be more like a prejudice, rather than something that is experimentally proven.
So 대동아도 잡아쳐야 돼. 다 주저도 검장에 다 검장으로 검점 보는 거잖아. 즉 가서 그게 카이라요. 다 숨어야 돼. 계속 해야 돼.
So here, I think the question is still open, and so what is needed here is further investigation and experiment, particularly on the part of the practitioners, by engaging in profound meditations and to see whether these changes could be effected within oneself.
So, 당연히 낭배 세단데 다디 셰베고 셰인도 전에 패지 나게 슝니 셰베 셰바 차라 이와시야다. 이 셰바도 룽디 남샤시야디 패지냐 판도 쳐보지온데.
So when talking about the nature of consciousness and the functions of mind, I think explanations that we find in the Vajrayana literature, where there is a discussion of the existence of different levels of consciousness or different levels of or subtleties of mind, and their correspondence to subtleties of energy levels or pranas. I think these discussions or these explanations can contribute a lot to the Buddha's understanding of the nature of mind and its functions.
또 셰바리가 당시 증행이나 아니 지금 남주 아주 셰바스야디 아니 가다지 치 지금 속져서 지금 다 대가지 통샤바 지금 다 텐데 딘데지 딘데기 남발 샤데 야나지 디두 노란 남발 샤데 딘데지 마도 코라 셰바 코레 지 코란 가서 세상 직zam기 넘버 콜로리아 샤철기요 말이에요. 다 딩야를 차와지 토안에 셰바 무엇은 마도 디 셰바 디 넘버 마샤를 토안에 셰바 무엇은 그냥 가고 그러셔.
So when we talk about the nature of consciousness, generally speaking, when we try to investigate ourselves through introspection, we find that this in our own experience, most of our conscious mind seem to be either states of consciousness that has to do with objects that we have experienced in the past, or some kind of recollections, past experiences inform our present consciousness, or it has to do with some kind of feeling or sensations. So our experience of consciousness tend to be predominantly pervaded by either discursive thoughts or feelings or sensations.
So today is an deve chikta nyamyo today is temporary day girmojuche maombe charku namdo namdi charmojuche and sheba kora 다대시 다 다대시바스니 고바 시야케요 말이지 가다시 대베 남도디 길무주체 마음베 지 드만나서디 차르무주체니 근데 지금 안에 또 돼야지 또 대투버시다 돼야기 뒤인디 갈래 파 검지고 검배왕래 링도 땅투나 넘시나 아니 파 셰베 릉신으로 파 딥댕에게 라지 유기 남바 나서 샷댕에게 라지 남바 나서 샷댕에게 아니 남도도 파도 파 지카소레 세베 슈데 아니 갈래 세점 릭점 녀에等얘기 셰베 릉신고 갈래를 지금 뭐 쳐야지 이게 뭐였어요?
Sorry, I forgot something earlier. So, given that our experience of our consciousness is so dominated by discursive thoughts that has to do with objects or things, and then also our feelings or sensations, it is very difficult for us to actually have a glimpse into the actual nature of consciousness, which is the mere state of knowing or luminosity. So therefore, one technique that one can use is to sort of sit in a meditation, do a sitting, and then try to sort of free your mind from sort of thoughts of recollection of any past experiences or any form of anticipation of what might happen in the future, but rather try to sort of abide in the nowness or in the present. In the present state, although one cannot talk of present consciousness, but try to sort of free your thoughts or free your mind from these sort of thoughts which are directed towards past experiences or looking into the future in some kind of anticipatory way, but rather being concerned only with the now and here and then try to sort of keep that kind of intervening, if I can use the word, space. So when you are able to kind of, in some sense, clear away these sort of, looking into the past or anticipate, looking into the future, but rather sort of abide within the present sort of now state, and then slowly one might begin to have a glimpse of a sense of sort of a vacuum, a sense of kind of void, and that if one can extend that period of voidness sort of for longer periods of time, then slowly and gradually the nature of consciousness, which is the mere luminosity and state of awareness, might slowly begin to dawn on you, and then through practice, that intervening period could be sort of lengthened, and also so that the awareness of the nature of consciousness becomes clearer in your mind. However, one must know that this simply having this experience of the luminosity and knowing nature of mind in itself is not a profound realization. Because many of the formless realms are considered to be results of sort of abiding in such sort of states of clarity.
명아 샨다가 심베토네 any 냠니시아야 먹으시 불러야
However, using that initial experience of the luminosity of consciousness as a basis, then one can build up on that by complementing with other practices.
제네다 다원디다 독den사야 리스면 생각. 독den사다 다 저다 가서래. 리셔럽스 리셔.
So this is how we can look at the Buddha's teaching on the truth of suffering in that kind of within that complexity.
다전에 동행이 규디 머리벌이 중어리 사야지 다 신에 다 동행이 규디 십제자 주셔야지 다 군주된 봐야 되는 상담이.
So once you have developed that kind of recognition of the dukkha nature of our existence, then we also already have an understanding that at the root of our existence, sort of dukkha existence, is this fundamental confusion or avidya. And then this, of course, points towards the second truth, that is the truth of the origin of suffering. So we will leave at that.
Thank you. Good night. See you again tomorrow.
One of the reasons why I pointed out this complexity in the understanding of this term truth in relation to the Four Noble Truths is because there is a fundamental difference between, say, Madhyamaka Prasangika school and mainstream Buddhist schools as to how one distinguishes between ordinary beings and Arya beings, the superior beings. The mainstream Buddhist schools makes the distinction on the basis of whether or not the individual practitioner has gained direct intuitive insight into the Four Noble Truths, a criteria which the Madhyamaka Prasangikas do not accept, because according to Madhyamaka Prasangika school, even non-Arya beings, ordinary beings, can have direct intuitive realizations of the Four Noble Truths.
제네다 동해담 바스 샤인도 다 그리스 스고스 라바이나 랑주 아니 다 래뇽 군중 래 제den에 다 근데질이야 다 간다 자와 지금 동해기 댄싱이지야 아니 동해담 바스 다 소딩스래 다 될이야 신뇌의 나주 회진샤실이었어.
So, what exactly is the meaning of dukkha or suffering? Here, suffering or dukkha is the
origin of suffering.
All right. 다 동네다 봐서야지. 다 대바시스야게 담바사야랑 과란다 좀더 좀대한 개발기 과나로면 해야 돼. 다디 셴르루체. 말 14호 말에 챙기면들라. 이니 마찬가지 반복을 샤시는 야입니다.
Now, talking about the Four Noble Truths, the first one is, of course, the truth of suffering, and here the sort of the usage of this term truth in context of the four four factors it seems that according to different philosophical schools, there is a different interpretation of this word truth. But I'm not going to touch that, partly because I myself do not remember all of this, and partly because it is going to complicate my explanation. So in dealing with complex issues like that, perhaps the best sort of response is to adopt a dignified silence.
다가다 오늘 이렇게 바뀐 거. 다게 전대 세브지디가 내가 찍듯이 denshim이다서 주로 무슨도 통해 소소기고 요새지. den시 무슨도 통마 통도 통하네. 소소기보다 파괴 인식하는데 텐주를 여지던 게 야말이. 좀더 어머들이 인식했던 게.
That which is the basis of our experience of painful experiences, and in brief, dukkha refers to our state of existence as conditioned by karma and delusions, or karma and afflictive emotions. So in Asanga states in Abhidhamma Sammucca that dukkha can be, the concept of dukkha, the concept of true dukkha, or the truth of suffering, must embrace both the environment where we live and also the individual beings living within it. So when we talk about the environment in which the individual, unenlightened individual beings live in, then here Buddhism talks about its cosmogony of the three realms of existence, the kama dhatu, and desire realm, formless realm, and form realms. The difficulty here is how to try to sort of conceptually understand. The point here is how to conceptualize this Buddhist concept of the three realms of existence. How can we conceive, for example, like form realms and formless realms?
The first of the Noble Truths is the truth of suffering. In the second teaching, His Holiness the Dalai Lama begins to expand upon this truth as the foundation for the other three. What is suffering, and in particular, what is meant by the Sanskrit term dukkha in Buddhism? It's often said falsely about Buddhism that it sees all life as suffering. From the fact that Buddha said, all this is suffering, people infer that Buddhism is radically life-denying. In fact, Buddha never said all life is suffering. He only said the unenlightened life is suffering. He went on to say, more importantly, that the enlightened life is bliss. It is nirvana, free of suffering. He himself experienced a boundless energy, a perfect bliss. Buddha never said he still suffered. So Buddhism is very optimistic about our prospects. It urges us, of course, to confront the suffering attendant upon our ignorance. It encourages us that we can find true happiness once we develop wisdom. Buddhism helps us to notice that pleasurable experiences are temporary. Pleasurable occurrences exist only in relation to the background of our experience. If we look at that background, we find that we are born in pain, die in pain, and in between are subject to illness, hunger, and the effects of the elements, not to mention our increasing decrepitude as we grow older. The background of our life's experience is indeed a basic form of suffering. It's called the suffering of change. The Dalai Lama points out that suffering prevails no matter which realm of existence we are dwelling in, be it the desire realm of the senses, the form realm of intellectual pursuits, or the formless realm of advanced meditational states. As long as we appropriate experience from the self-centered perspective, driven by misunderstanding our true nature, we are doomed to frustration. Because of our fundamental self-centered ignorance at the root of our consciousness, we react to the conditions of our existence with a kind of selfish desire that produces all kinds of other afflictive emotions. These afflictive emotions can be compared to the 7 deadly sins. But it is the fundamental ignorance at the heart of our existence, our misperception of the absoluteness of ourself, that gives rise to these afflictive emotions and prevents us from realizing the lasting joy and happiness that we all seek. So, at the basis of suffering, self-seeking ignorance is the first link in a causal chain that the Buddha called the chain of dependent origination. Once we have a good grasp of the nature of suffering, we clearly see the start of the chain, which is the second truth